This week we're going to talk about Western expansion, and this is just continuing a trend that we've seen throughout American history of the United States moving further and further west. And this is driven typically by this desire for land. The land being plentiful and cheap in North America is always a huge part of what drew settlers. Land that would provide new routes to wealth, land that would provide independence. We also start to see that there's this mindset that's developing in the United States that wasn't necessarily there before, but a mindset that's developing in the mid-19th century, this idea of manifest destiny, that it is the destiny of the United States to govern and to settle all of the North American continent. And we see that this migration of Americans across the Mississippi is really happening. By 1860, you have over 4 million Americans are living west of the Mississippi. So we saw a dramatic expansion of American immigration and American settlement west of the Appalachians. And now the same thing is happening west of the Mississippi. And it's just remarkable how quickly it grows, how the promise of land and freedom in these unsettled parts is so inspirational and such a draw to people. It also brings new people into our story, into interaction with the Americans. The Plains Indians that are up to this point have had relatively little exposure to European settlers. Indians like the Apache and the Comanche. And it also brings us into contact with the Spanish settlers who had been very successful in establishing missions in New Mexico. About 20,000 Hispanics settled in New Mexico by the beginning of the 19th century. Less successful in Texas. We only find about 2,500 Hispanic settlers there, but still there's a presence there that these American settlers are going to have to come in contact with them. They're going to have to engage with them. It's also worth highlighting, I'm going to talk about this a little more later on in the week, but it's also worth highlighting the confusion in Mexico at this time. So remember that all of Latin America, apart from Brazil, is part of this huge Spanish Empire that collapses in the early 19th century when Napoleon invades Spain. It means that no one from Spain is now coming to the New World to govern these colonies. Napoleon perhaps intended to, but he's fighting a giant war against the Austrians and the British and the Russians. And so even though a lot of Mexican society wanted to remain united to the Spanish Empire and to the Spanish crown, they simply have to start administering themselves. And when the Spanish kings make a comeback after Napoleon is defeated, the Mexicans, and this is true of other Latin American countries as well, find that the new Spanish kings are pushing a more progressive agenda that the Mexican people don't particularly like. And so that accelerates their route to independence. You have this situation where you have these modernizing kings that the more liberal part of Mexican society doesn't like because they're kings, and the more conservative part doesn't like because they're liberal. And so this accelerates the move towards Latin American independence at the beginning of the 19th century. I'm not going to go into that in detail in this class, but suffice it to say that Mexico had become independent in 1821, so right in the middle of this period, and that it is weak and disorganized in trying to engage with the threat that American settlers very much pose. We find American settlers traveling to aiming at least for three different locations. Two on the West Coast that I'm going to talk about in this video, Oregon and California. And so it's during this period that we have the creation of the Oregon Trail, a footpath of about 2,000 miles that would carry settlers from Missouri until the Pacific coast of Oregon. And it was amazing how many settlers attempted this trail that seemed so arduous. They were promised, if they made it to the end, 160 acres of land for each settler who would farm that land for 4 years' time. That was enough of an incentive for many people who were inspired by what their ancestors had done in settling the Midwest, and by those who felt that they had nothing to lose. but these journeys could be extremely arduous. These wagon train communities that we read about, very, very difficult lifestyle. Diseases rampant. You have to deal with crossing mountains, the snow, and the ice in the winter, with the heat in the summer. People are burning dried out buffalo dung in order to survive. We find that even when they make it, those people who make it to the West Coast, there's a high rate of divorce among these households simply because of the stress of the trip. Perhaps these marriages had lost children along the way. So it's an incredibly difficult trip to make. But what's amazing is how many people do it, and that they come to a realization of the marvels of the Midwest and the West of America, the geographic beauty of this country, huge herds of buffalo, the rolling plains, and this inspires further settlers to try and make this trip. California, of course, had been settled by the Spanish in the middle of the 18th century, and the Spanish, by the early 19th century, had established missions all along the coast of California. But once gold, in particular, is discovered in California, we start to find more and more American settlers also making their way to California. One of the most colorful characters who does this is John Fremont. And Fremont is interesting because he maps out a trail, sort of a branch off from the Oregon Trail that will take you to modern-day Sacramento. And then, with the full knowledge of the president, at least, he conducts what's basically a coup. Remember I said that Mexico is very disorganized at this time. California is this far-flung province that the Mexicans have very little oversight of, and the Mexican government has very little military presence in California. And Fremont is basically able to take over most of these missions and establish a Republic of California, which is marked by the flag of the grizzly bear, which is still the flag of California today. And I'll talk about other westward expansion in the following videos this week.